Good morning or good afternoon. Today is an asynchronous day, so you will not see me today, but you will see me tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get started. This is our homepage. It'll either say Math 7 Accelerated or Math 8. Our announcements. Today is an asynchronous day. You're going to need to click on this link for today's lesson. Then do today's homework, Big Ideas Online Chapter 6 Test Review, Part 1, 6.1 to 6.3. So just in case you didn't get that, under Zoom meeting, here's the same information again, because we do not have a Zoom meeting. Okay, we are currently on week 17. If you click your link to the module, if you're Math 7, it's a frog. If you're Math 8, it's a cannon. If you click on it, it takes you to this week's module. Extra practice, extra credit is due Friday. Any missing work is also due Friday. Here's week 17. Here's the module for week 17. We have the agenda, the weekly review, and tonight's homework. So if you click on the agenda, let's take a look. Here we go. Unit 2 review. Warm up, work on missing assignments. Today is an asynchronous day. You're going to watch this video, then do Big Ideas Online Chapter 6 Review Part 1. Here are the pages from the book. So here's the pages from the book. Remember, here's the down and dirty nitty-gritty notes, and then here's the practice problems. Here's the nitty-gritty notes that you're going to need and the practice problems. And then for 6.3, these are the notes and the practice problems. Okay. So the links for those can be found on the agenda as well. And here is the link of today's video as well. So you've got plenty of places to access the video. You have the review pages that can be found in the book. And you have this video that's going to take you through the lesson. Then you need to get started on the homework, which can be found, course modules, right here. Chapter 6 Review, Part 1, Big Ideas Online, Wednesday. So with all of that, let's go ahead and get started on the notes. Okay, if you are in 7 Excel, we are working from the Advanced 2 textbook. If you are in Math 8, we are working from the Course 3 textbook. We are doing the Chapter 6 test review, 6.1 to 6.3, and it can be found on pages 279 to 280. Okay. So let's take a look at 6.1. 6.1, relations and functions. Remember, in a function, every input has only one output. What does that mean? Well, input, which is also x, and we have -2, 0, 2, and 4. Here's our inputs, or our x's. Our outputs, or y's, are -1, 3, and 5. And then we use arrows to show which input goes with which output. So in this case, we have 4 inputs, and each input has only one output. And a good way of checking that is we have 4 inputs and we have 4 arrows. 4 inputs and 4 arrows. Therefore, this is a function. Let's take a look at another one. Input, which is x, -2, 0, 2, and 4. Output, which is y. And we still have -1, 3, and 5. But in this case, -2 has 2 different outputs. If you input -2, you're going to get out either -1 or 3. So in this case, -2 has 2 different outputs. And a good way of checking that is we have 4 inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4, but we have 5 arrows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arrows. 4 inputs, but 5 arrows. Therefore, this is not a function. In a function, every input has only 1 output. 4 inputs, 4 arrows. In this case, -2 has 2 outputs. So we have 4 inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4, but we have 5 arrows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, this is not a function. So that's it for 6.1. Let's go ahead and take a look at 6.2. 6.2. Representations of functions. So in chapter 4, we would have called this graphing linear equations. In chapter 6, we're calling it representations of functions. It's the same thing. So in chapter 4, it was called graphing linear equations. Here in chapter 6, we're calling it representations of functions. So the book is going to ask us to graph this function. And I want you to take a look. It does follow y equals mx plus b format using inputs -1, 0, 1, and 2. So we're still going to create a table, only we're going to call this input, which is x. Here's our function, also known as a linear equation. We're going to call this output, which is y. And x and y together make our ordered pair. So they're giving us our x's. We're going to have -1, 0, 1, and 2. So now it's just a matter of substitution. Y equals, I'm going to substitute -1 for my x, and then I'm going to solve. So when we input -1, this function spits out a -2. So here's our ordered pair. We're going to do the same thing with 0. We are going to substitute 0 for x and then solve. So y equals -1. So when we input 0, this function spits out -1. So our second ordered pair is 0, -1. Let's substitute y equals, we're going to substitute 1 for x and then solve. So when we input 1, this function spits out 0. So here's my third ordered pair. And then our last one, y equals, let's substitute 2 for x and then solve. So when we input 2, this function spits out 1. So here's my next ordered pair. Now I'm going to graph these. So we have -1, -2, 0, -1, 1, 0, and 2, 1. So here's our function. You can leave it like that, or you can connect the points. It's up to you. So this is the same thing that we did in chapter 4 when we were graphing linear equations. Only now we're calling it a representation of functions. Here's my linear equation, only now we're calling it a linear function. Instead of us choosing our inputs or our x's, they're telling us, use these inputs or use these x's. But we are still creating a table to figure out our ordered pairs and then graphing our ordered pairs. So our third, 6.3, take a look. 6.3, we need to determine the linear function, or determine this, the title is just linear functions. So basically, instead of calling them linear equations, we're now calling them linear functions. It's the same thing. So instead of linear equations, it's now linear functions. So the book is going to tell us, use the graph or table, it could be a graph or a table, to write a linear function that relates y to x. So use the graph or table to write a linear function that relates y to x. And they will give you a graph or a table, and the points will be marked. -1, -3, 0, -1, 1, 1, and 2, 3. And chances are there won't be a line through it. It could have a line, it may not have a line. So you're going to have a graph that looks like this, or a table that has these points. So it could be a graph, or it could be a table that looks like this. Okay, so this graph and this table represent the same function. So the book will give you a graph or a table, and they want you to write the linear function, also known as the linear equation, that this represents. So we know that a linear equation or a linear function is represented by y equals mx plus b. We also know that m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is when x is 0, what is our y? Our y is going to be b. So when x is set to 0, what's our y? The y will be b. So let's look at this. It's kind of nice that they've given us a point on the y-axis. So when x is 0, my y is -1. So our y-intercept is -1. Same thing down here. When the input or the x is 0, our output or our y is -1. So that's done. Yay! Now we need to find the slope. And there's two ways of finding the slope. We know slope is rise over run. So we can pick any 2 points. I'm going to pick this point and this point, and then we can count it out. I'm going up 2, which is +2, and then to the right, 1, +1. So my slope is +2 over +1, which reduces to 2. So my slope is 2. Now, we can, sometimes if they give us a table, it's not graphed out, so we can't do rise over run. We do have to use the change in y over the change in x, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and we need to pick 2 points. So I'm going to pick this point and this point, which would be this point on my table and this point on my table. So we have -1, -3, 0, -1. We need to label them. x1, y1, x2, y2. Then we're going to substitute these numbers into this equation. -1 minus -3 over 0 minus -1. A negative and a negative is positive. So -1 plus 3 is 2. A negative and a negative is positive. 0 plus 1 is 1. So here we can see my slope is 2. So the slope is +2. Then everything else comes down. Y equals mx plus b. So my linear function or my linear equation is y equals 2x minus 1. Okay? So here they gave us the graph or the table, and we had to figure out the linear function. And this is the same thing that we do to find out the linear equation. We're just calling it a function now. So that's what we're doing today. So you need to decide if what they give you is a function or not a function. Remember to count the inputs and the arrows. 4 inputs, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 arrows, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a function because every input has only one output. Here, -2 has 2 outputs. And a good way of determining that is if you count every input, 1, 2, 3, 4, then count your arrows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 arrows, but 4 inputs. So this is not a function. Then we have representations of functions, which is the same thing as graphing linear equations. They're going to give us an equation and give us the inputs. We need to create our table, figure out what our ordered pairs are, and then graph them. And last but not least, the book will give us a graph or a table, then ask us to figure out what the linear function is. So we know that it is y equals mx plus b. We know m is our slope, and we have 2 ways of finding slope: rise over run, or the change in y over the change in x, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And you can use 2 points on the graph or 2 points from the table. Substitute your slope in. And then your y-intercept is, where does the line cross the y-axis when x is set to 0? So when x is set to 0, it crosses my y-axis at -1. When x is set to 0, it crosses my y-axis at -1. So we just substitute that in, and then here is our linear function, also known as a linear equation. Okay, you may need to watch this video a few times, but none of this is new. It's all review. Good luck, and I will see you tomorrow.